but we only scratch the surface of the meaning of the book.
But what I found really interesting was the timeline that you talked about. The fuse leading. Could you explain a little bit about the timeline?
Well,
And
go ahead.
I like to focus in on Galatians 4:4, which I'm sure you'll bring up at some point in time.
Well, I mean, there's a reason why it's what is it about in the fullness of time, Paul says, that God came to us in the form of a human in the fullness of time. And that, I mean, I think he has much deeper theological meaning to that verse. But there's also a fullness of time that just happens temporally. Like there is something about the timing of the arrival of Jesus. And you can just ask the question, forget about scripture for a second. Why does he come when he comes? Why couldn't he have come earlier? Why couldn't he have come later? Why does he come then? And I think that's a good question to ask. That's a question that most people like us would say, well, why do you believe this thing that's 2,000 years old? I would much rather look at a theistic view of God that's more current. Like I still think that someone's going to pop up at some point and create some theistic view that will leverage science in a way that's very direct to capture the heart in a, because 86% of people on planet Earth believe there's a higher power. And a lot of them have personalized this in some way, right? Like it has to be something I can determine purely with science or something I can determine purely with personal experience, lived experience. And this idea that you have a view of theism that is rooted, is 2,000 years old, guys. Come on, right? And I think that that's what you start to hear now when people talk about, well, your view of gender, your view of marriage, your view of sexuality is just ancient. It's just old. It's not in step with what we know about humans today. That's what they'll say. So I think the timing of when, and this is also true in criminal trials where you look at, it's not so much where, I mean, yes, look, if a murder occurs in someone's bedroom or occurs at someone's place of business, that presents me with data that will help me identify who the killer is. Just the location. If only a few people know where you live, for example, I now have a pool of suspect, which is much smaller than I would have if everyone knows where you work. So where it happens is going to help me determine who did it. But also when it happens is going to tell me who did it. And I make timelines. That's the fuse that's burning up to the day of the murder, because certain conditions are met that open a window for the murder or provoke a killer to finally be at the end of his rope, the end of his fuse. And today's the day. Or there's something post-killing that a deadline he's trying to meet, right? If the girlfriend says, look, I need you to do this by Thursday or I'm leaving you, good chance he's going to kill her by Thursday. So those are the kinds of things that start to create deadlines. So it's all preconditions and deadlines that determine when people die. And every set of preconditions and deadlines is unique to each potential suspect. So if I'm working 3 suspects in a case that all look like they could be pretty good, but one of them has like preconditions that are met just before the murder and a deadline that which just falls right after the murder, that's a fuse that I'm going to be looking at him. Timelines matter. Same thing is true with Christianity. Certain things happen to fall in a certain way that are spiritual, that are kind of cultural based on the Roman Empire, and that are, related to kind of prophetic within Judaism and the prophecies that had to be filled. So if you start to take all of these and lay them out on a timeline and show people where the deadlines are and where the preconditions are met, you'll see there's an open window of about 100 years from about 29 BC to about 70 AD. Now that's a lot to say. And that's why a lot of my work is visual, because this stuff makes more sense when you see it.
Right.
When you see it charted out, mapped out, and you see the open window, you realize that, whatever's going to happen, the culture was aligning and the prophecies of the Old Testament were aligning, and the spiritual condition of all of these cultures was aligning in such a way that it turns out there was a window of opportunity during the Pax Romana, once the roads were in place so that the message could travel, once the language is in place, the Etruscan alphabet was in place, the technology is in place to write the stories, to write the data down. All of that opens up a window right in that 100-year period. And who do you think falls in the middle third of the 100 years? 30 years from the beginning, 30 years from the end. That's the life of Jesus. So that's where you can look at it and say, that's to me, when I first saw that years ago, I don't think I never, if there's somebody else who talked about that, I'd like to know who it was.